Let's talk about your SPAC. What is the latest on your SPAC efforts and the kind of companies you're looking for?
Look, we're looking for good, sound companies that are going to be around for the next 100 years. I want to buy a company that I'm happy to own for the next 20 or 30 years.
Do you think the SPAC process will change the traditional IPO process fundamentally? Like, is this the beginning of a sea change in how companies get to the public markets?
I do think we are at a watershed moment in the SPAC world, and that SPACs are now here to stay. The general acceptance of SPACs, both on the sell side and the buy side for companies being willing to sell themselves to SPACs, and SPACs being better buyers of assets, that has changed dramatically. The management teams in the SPACs have gotten better and better. It's not going to look in the future like it looks today. The SPAC world will get more mature, it will define itself, it will redefine itself, but I think the SPAC product is here to stay as a mechanism for existing companies to merge into pre-existing publicly listed blank check companies.
Bitcoin has been on a tear. How bullish are you on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and how much do you believe they will fundamentally transform our economy?
When we talk about blockchain, and we can come back and talk about the infrastructure, that's the highways and the pipes that are necessary for Bitcoin, but they're necessary for many other applications, and I think they're very useful, and I'm very bullish on them. When you talk about Bitcoin in itself, I don't have a strong opinion on Bitcoin. In essence, I'm not a strong believer in Bitcoin. It is a developing asset, potentially. And for all the reasons it's a strong developing asset class, it may fail. Remember, part of the integrity of an asset class, or part of the integrity of a system, is knowing who owns it, and knowing who has it, and knowing why it's being transferred. And is it being used for legitimate causes? Is it being used for good? Or is it being used for illegitimate causes? Is it being used in corrupt practices and corrupt ways? The Bitcoin system today has no transparency to it. So there are a lot of people that question, why would you need a system that does not have an audit trail, does not have integrity? You don't know who owns it. You don't know exactly how much exists today, how much has been mined, how much has been lost, how much has been thrown away on hard drives because they don't exist anymore. So it lacks some of the basic integrities of a real market. And then you have to get into the idea or the concept that it's a theoretical value. It's a theoretical value, and there's a lot of other things that have this. It's a theoretical value because someone is willing to buy it or someone is willing to sell it at that price today. But there's nothing tangible behind it. At least when you buy an ounce of gold, you can deliver an ounce of gold to someone.
Obviously, there are risks, which you laid out. How should the Fed in a new administration be approaching alternative assets?
Well, I think the government will look at them. We went through a fad in the last 4 years where there was this whole new idea where we were going to create new coins, where we were going to coin everything, where we're going to create these coins that trade, and we were going to do these ICOs, these initial coin offerings, and we were going to be able to put anything in a Coinbase. I think the regulators appropriately stepped in and said, look, if it looks like, tastes like, feels like, and smells like a security, you're going to have to go through the legal apparatus to create a security, and you're going to have to file the paperwork and the regulatory filings that you need to create a security. So I think as Bitcoin continues to evolve, it will get more and more regulatory scrutiny, because at the end of the day, the regulatory community always is looking out to make sure that no one gets hurt. And they want to make sure that there's no unsuspecting investor that ends up owning something that they didn't know what they owned, and they lost a lot of money because they didn't understand it.
So how does the payments landscape look different then in, let's say, a decade? Does cash disappear in this unprecedented economy and new economic activity that we're seeing?
Well, I think cash can easily disappear. I mean, the idea of paper currency in the legitimate world is becoming more and more obsolete. And I believe it can become totally obsolete. But the fintech payment systems are also not going to replace the banks. There's a big difference between a fintech payment system and a fintech ability to move cash and the banking systems. And remember, the banking systems are big, they're highly regulated, and they're regulated again to protect investors. They're regulated to protect depositories. So when someone puts money into a bank that is highly regulated, they are 100% confident that they can get their money out at a moment's notice. And there's an enormous amount of very expensive and very costly regulation that goes around that concept that if I put $1 in, or I put 50 cents in, or I put $100 in, whenever I want to withdraw it, it will be there for me. And therefore, to take deposits and pay interest on them, when you agree to be in that business, you agree to have enormous amount of regulatory burden. If you're just in the money movement business, you have a lot less regulatory burden on you. But the question is, how does the money get into the money movement system?
Now, you've worked a long time in banking, you spent some time in the administration, you've spent some time exploring since then. Would you be open to public service again?
Look, I thought my time in the government was literally the most amazing couple of years of my life. And the ability for me to give back to the country was extraordinary. I was very happy doing it. If a great opportunity comes along again, of course I'll consider it.
So have you had any talks with the Biden team about joining?
Like I said, if a great opportunity comes along, of course I'll consider it.